Live television is meant to entertain and inform, but sometimes it captures moments that should never be seen. From shocking accidents to chilling events, these broadcasts left audiences frozen in disbelief. In this video, we're counting down 5 of the most horrific moments ever aired on live TV. Real, unscripted events that unfolded in front of millions and still haunt viewers to this day. August 23, 2010, a bright tourist bus sat parked in Xuxa Park, a seemingly ordinary sight in the capital city. Inside, 25 people, mostly tourists from Hong Kong, settled in for what was supposed to be a day of sightseeing. But among them was a man whose quiet rage was about to ignite a living nightmare. Rolando Mendoza, a 55-year-old former police officer, boarded the bus with a rifle, handcuffs, and a grudge that had been simmering for months. He wasn't just angry, he felt betrayed. Mendoza had been dismissed from the Philippine National Police over extortion allegations, and he believed he had been wronged. In his mind, this was justice. He would force the world to listen. He hijacked the bus, armed and determined not to rob or harm, at least not at first, but to demand his job back and clear his name. But what began as a desperate protest slowly morphed into a blood-soaked catastrophe. With news cameras rolling and reporters circling like vultures, every terrifying moment played out live. The world watched. The passengers sat frozen in fear, and Mendoza watched too, from inside the bus. He had a television on board. He could see everything. As the hours crawled by, -11 in total, tensions frayed. Negotiators tried to keep the situation calm, and for a time it seemed to work. A few hostages were released, but time is cruel in a standoff. It amplifies fear. It unravels control. Then a mistake, one that changed everything. Mendoza's brother Gregorio, himself a police officer, had tried to help. He begged his brother to surrender, pleaded with authorities to listen. But then, live on national television, Gregorio was arrested by fellow officers, shoved into a squad car just outside the scene. Mendoza saw it all, his last thread of hope ripped from him in real time. Something inside him snapped. Inside the bus, panic turned into horror. He shouted threats over the radio. He claimed he had harmed hostages already, and he promised more violence if he didn't get what he wanted. One hostage, Mrs. Leong, later shared how her husband had tried to protect them, tried to stop Mendoza. He was gunned down before her eyes. Still, she held on, fighting the despair for the sake of her children waiting back home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the situation spiraled. Mendoza was watching everything. News helicopters overhead, police movements below, the creeping approach of the assault team. The media, in their race for ratings, were unintentionally feeding him tactical information. He knew what was coming. He was ready. When the order was finally given to storm the bus, the police moved in, but it was chaos. They tried to force open the back door and were met with more gunfire. Hesitation paralyzed the assault. Finally, snipers were ordered to fire. Mendoza was shot and killed, but by then it was too late. 8 hostages were already dead. Survivors emerged. Among them was the bus driver, Alberto Lubang, who had managed to escape and run to the police. His voice, ragged and desperate, rang out in the night. "Everyone is dead!" Outrage erupted almost instantly, especially in Hong Kong, where the families of the murdered tourists demanded answers, demanded justice. A formal apology came from the Philippine government, but it couldn't mend what had been broken. An inquiry followed. Philippine Justice Secretary Leila de Lima spearheaded the investigation, and what it revealed was nothing short of damning. The police were woefully unprepared. No crisis plan, no specialized team. Multiple chances to end the standoff early had been missed. And the non-stop media coverage? It handed Mendoza a tactical advantage on a silver platter. Several officers were suspended or demoted. Manila's police chief was removed. In response, the Philippine government scrambled to make changes. New training programs, new policies for hostage crises, and a specialized tourist police unit. They wanted to make sure this never happened again. But for the families of the dead, no policy could undo the nightmare. It was December 14, 1982, in Rio de Janeiro. Maria Arenalda da Silva, just 23 years old, cradled her baby daughter Denubia as she stepped into the television studio, her arms trembling not from nerves but from exhaustion, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Her 9-month-old was dying, and no one had listened. For months, Maria had wandered the city, desperate for help. She'd gone to Pedro Ernesto, Souza Aguiar, any hospital that might take them in. Her daughter was suffering from a rare and vicious eye condition that caused her to bleed, but all she heard was excuses. "We're full. No beds. We don't know how to treat this." Denubia's condition worsened with every passing day. Maria had run out of time and out of faith in the system, so she turned to the only place left, television. O Povo na TV was no ordinary show. It thrived on chaos. Hosted by Wilton Franco, Wagner Montes, and others, it claimed to expose injustice and corruption, but it also blurred the line between help and exploitation. Its audience tuned in for drama, and Maria hoped that drama might finally force someone to act. She arrived at the station around 11 a.m., waiting through the noise and bustle until her name was finally called. At 1:40 p.m., she stepped onto the stage, cameras already rolling, and gently lifted her daughter into view. Denubia's face was swollen. Her tiny body barely moved. With a trembling voice, Maria told her story, the hospitals that turned her away, the nights spent fearing she'd wake to find her baby cold beside her. The hosts listened, appearing sympathetic. They condemned the public healthcare system and pointed fingers, but made no move to stop the cameras. And then, something happened, or rather, something stopped. As Maria continued to plead, Denubia's body slowly went still. The audience didn't know what they were seeing at first. It was subtle, a shift in Maria's expression, the way she instinctively held her daughter tighter. But in that moment, a child had died, and the show went on. The hosts didn't pause. Many couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. It wasn't part of the script. It was real. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, it was far too late. An ambulance arrived, but not to save Denubia, only to take her tiny, lifeless body to the morgue. Maria, shattered, walked out of the studio, still holding her daughter, the same way she had carried her in. The show resumed its regular programming, business as usual, but the country would not forget. 3 days later, on December 17th, the Folha de S. Paulo published a scathing editorial. It didn't just criticize the hospitals, it condemned the show. It asked the questions millions were thinking. Had a line been crossed? Had tragedy become entertainment? Even as the public cried out, "O Povo na TV" didn't slow down. The scandal only grew. Less than a year later, in May 1983, one of its regular guests, Roberto Lenruber, was arrested alongside host Wilton Franco. Lenruber had claimed to be a spiritual healer, performing so-called surgeries on camera, but his treatments were fake and dangerous. His rise to TV fame had preyed on desperate people, much like Maria. The backlash became impossible to ignore. By 1984, the program was canceled for good, but the damage had already been done. What stayed with people wasn't just the show's manipulation or Lenruber's lies. It was Denubia, that fragile baby girl who died not in a hospital bed surrounded by professionals.
What she doesn't know is that the show itself is in deep trouble, starting now.
It was January 11th, 2001, in Rio de Janeiro. The set of Xuxa Park was bursting with music. Nearly 300 people, most of them children, filled the studio, eyes wide with wonder as their beloved host, Xuxa Meneghel, danced and sang beneath the bright studio lights. As the closing number echoed through the studio, dancers twirling and kids clapping along, something went wrong. It started small, just a flicker of flame inside the massive spaceship prop used for character entrances. A stagehand noticed it, ran in with a fire extinguisher, expecting to put it out quickly. But instead of dying, the fire exploded to life. Plastic decorations ignited instantly, sending a plume of black, choking smoke into the air. Within seconds, the set transformed into a nightmare. Children screamed. Parents lunged toward exits. Crew members shouted, trying to guide people out, but the smoke made it nearly impossible to see. The intense heat melted parts of the set. Chaos took over. Somewhere in the madness, a little girl was seen trapped, frozen in place, stuck on a faux Ferris wheel that had been part of the playground-themed stage. And then, against all instinct, someone ran toward the fire. Xuxa's bodyguard, Leandro Nilsson, pushed through the flames. Ignoring the searing heat, he climbed the prop to reach the terrified child. The moment was pure panic. Everyone else fleeing, he moved deeper into the blaze. But he reached her, he got her down, and he carried her out as the fire raged behind them. Meanwhile, some cameras, still rolling, captured it all. The flames, the screams, the scrambling crew. Later, that footage would air on Brazilian news, and viewers across the country would be horrified to recognize the set that once symbolized joy now consumed by smoke and fire. By the time firefighters brought it under control, the studio was gutted. 26 people were injured, including 2 children, ages 7 and 10, who suffered severe burns. Another adult who'd helped with rescues was also seriously hurt. Dozens more were left physically untouched, but emotionally scarred. The laughter that had once echoed through the studio was replaced by silence. Xuxa, shaken to her core, wasn't hurt, but the pain was visible. She had dedicated her career to children, to making them feel safe, loved, and seen. Watching them panic, watching some suffer, was a weight she carried deeply. In the days that followed, she visited the injured in the hospital, sitting beside them, holding their hands. But the damage couldn't be undone. Investigators later confirmed the fire had been caused by a short circuit in the spaceship's wiring. No foul play, just faulty electrics, and a set designed more for fantasy than for fire safety. Xuxa Park never aired again. The network, Globo, canceled the show permanently. 8 episodes, already filmed, were locked away, never to be seen. The set was reduced to rubble, and Xuxa herself would never return to children's television in the same way. Something had changed. A dream had died.
The first bodies have been found in the search for survivors of a plane crash in Chile. However, it is thought unlikely anything other than bodies will be taken from the sea near the Juan Fernandez Islands to the west of Chile. 21 people are thought to have perished, including one of the country's best-loved television personalities.
It was September 2nd, 2011 in Chile. Millions of adults were tuned in to Cale 7, one of the country's most beloved game shows. Then, without warning, the screen went black. And then, a serious-looking news anchor appeared. Her face was pale, her voice cracked. What she said next froze an entire nation. A Chilean Air Force aircraft had vanished off the coast of Robinson Crusoe Island. On board were 21 people. Among them, Felipe Camiroaga. The name alone sparked disbelief. Felipe wasn't just a television host, he was Chilean television. Charismatic, warm, effortlessly funny. He brought light into living rooms every morning on Buenos Dias a Todos. He was more than famous. He was trusted, loved, a part of everyday life. But now he was missing. The plane, a Casa C-212 Aviocar, had left Santiago earlier that day. It wasn't a luxury flight. It was a mission of purpose. Camiroaga, along with journalist Roberto Bruce, a team of TVN crew members, and businessman Felipe Cubillos, were heading to Robinson Crusoe Island to document rebuilding efforts after the devastating 2010 earthquake. They were going not for spectacle, but for service, to shine a light on resilience. The weather was brutal, heavy rain, relentless wind. The pilots tried twice to land. Each time, they were forced to pull up. On the third attempt, the aircraft vanished. At first, there was hope. Maybe they made an emergency landing. Maybe the plane had gone off radar but survived. Fishermen and locals joined the search, clinging to possibility. But as the hours passed and no signal came, the truth began to harden into something unbearable. There would be no rescue. There were no survivors. In Santiago, the newsroom at TVN fell into stunned silence. Anchors fought back tears. Producers sat motionless, their hands hovering over equipment they couldn't bring themselves to touch. These weren't just co-workers. These were friends, family, a part of the fabric of their lives. All across Chile, candles were lit. Flowers lined the sidewalks. People wept openly on the street, unable to believe the faces they had grown up with were gone, just like that. And then, another revelation. Something so chilling it seemed torn from a novel. A memory card was recovered from the wreckage in November, wrapped inside a water bottle. Photographer Romina Irarrázaval, one of the passengers, had taken photos during the flight, 409 in total. But it was the last few images that left people breathless. One showed the cabin floor, feet, bags, shadows. The next, rising water pressing against a window. Her last act had been to protect the card, sealing it in plastic and placing it in a bottle. A final message from the deep, proof of their final moments. A silent goodbye. Investigators concluded that the aircraft had been overwhelmed by turbulent winds during its final descent. A wide turn at dangerously low altitude gave the pilots no chance to recover. The plane broke apart on impact. The ocean swallowed the wreckage. The shock was immeasurable. Chile hadn't just lost a few public figures. It had lost something deeply personal. The familiar smile of Camiroaga on morning television, Roberto Bruce's steady voice, the warmth, the laughter, the optimism, they were gone. In the days that followed, vigils swept across the country. Outside TVN's headquarters, mourners gathered in silence, candles flickering beneath posters and handwritten letters. The grief was collective. It was national. For once, Chile wasn't divided by politics or region. It stood united. In sorrow, weeks turned into months. Families recovered what they could. Bodies, belongings, memories. But the hole left behind could never truly be filled. The crash didn't just take lives. It shattered a sense of connection, of comfort, of daily companionship. These were not distant celebrities. They were familiar voices, mourning rituals, childhood heroes, and suddenly they were memories. To this day, the tragedy of the Casa C-212 crash remains one of the darkest moments in Chilean history. A wound that never quite healed. But somehow, amid the sorrow, something else endures, something stronger. It was September 28, 2012. Across America, millions of viewers tuned into Fox News. What they saw was familiar in format. A high-speed police chase unfolding live in Phoenix, Arizona. Helicopter cameras followed a copper-colored sedan as it wove dangerously through traffic. But no one, not the viewers, not the anchors, not even the police, was prepared for how this would end. Inside the car was 33-year-old Jodon Romero, a man with a troubled past. He was already wanted for violating parole on a weapons charge. That morning, he had escalated his life of turmoil by stealing a car at gunpoint. Sirens soon followed. Police helicopters locked on. Ground officers tracked him cautiously, giving distance while monitoring from the air. It was tense but routine, until Romero fired shots during the chase, once at officers, once terrifyingly at the news chopper above. And yet, the broadcast continued. Romero left the city limits and veered into the empty expanse of desert west of Phoenix. The road turned to dirt. Dust rose in plumes behind him, and then he stopped. The car door swung open. Cameras zoomed in. Romero stepped out, alone on a barren road, and began walking. His steps were erratic, his posture unsteady. Something was wrong. Very wrong. In the Fox News studio, anchor Shepard Smith sensed it. His tone shifted. "This scares me," he whispered, unease tightening in his voice. Then it happened. Romero suddenly collapsed to his knees. For a second, it looked like maybe he'd given up. Maybe this would end peacefully. But then he stood again, slowly, shakily, and reached into his waistband. The breath caught in Smith's throat. "Get off! Get off! Get off!" he shouted to the control room, panicked. He believed there was a delay, believed the producers would cut away in time. There wasn't. In a single devastating moment, Jodon Romero raised a handgun to his head and pulled the trigger. Silence followed. No music, no warning, just the raw horror of what millions had just witnessed. A man's final moment, beamed into homes across the country in real time. The screen quickly cut to commercial, but the damage was irreversible. When Fox News returned, Shepard Smith's face was pale. He looked directly into the camera and apologized, his voice cracking with remorse. "We really messed up," he admitted, "and we're all very sorry." But apologies couldn't take it back. The footage had aired, uncensored, unfiltered, and it reached far beyond just the general public. Romero had 3 children, ages 9, 13, and 15. They were at school when it happened. At first, rumors swirled among classmates. Something about a man on the news, a chase, a death. That evening, the 2 older boys searched online, curious. They pressed play, and they watched their father die. The trauma was instant, crushing. They hadn't recognized him at first, but when they did, when the voice and the clothes and the walk became unmistakable, the horror set in. The younger one vomited. The older screamed. Their mother, Angela Rodriguez, found them collapsed, trembling, broken. The boys never returned to school. They couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Nightmares plagued them. Panic attacks came without warning. The video, out there forever, was like a shadow following them everywhere. Angela filed a lawsuit against Fox News, saying her children had been exposed to something no child should ever see. Her words were simple, raw. They saw their father die because someone didn't press a button in time. The public outcry was swift and divided. Some defended the network. Live news is unpredictable, they said. But others asked, at what cost? Police chases are thrilling. They boost ratings, they draw in viewers. But that day, the line between journalism and voyeurism was crossed. The question echoed across newsrooms. Should live events, especially volatile ones, be broadcast at all? Romero's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. A reminder that even in a digital world driven by speed and spectacle, there are things that should not be shown, things that burn themselves into memory and never let go.